Good afternoon, this is Gary Kavanagh here on TRSI. I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Michael Dwyer. Michael, how have you been since the last time we spoke?
I have been fine, Gary. Thank you very much. And how are you?
Obviously, I mean the last time we spoke in this podcast. To the listener, we do talk between these shows, and sometimes even before them.
Even.
But not too often, because that would give a bit too much structure to this.
And there's always the risk that it would end up being stale, and we don't want to be stale.
So, given the timing of this episode, I suppose the primary thing we'll be doing now is making our seat predictions for the election. Therefore, giving everyone the glorious chance to look at what we say and then come back to us when we're inevitably wrong and go, well, you got that one wrong and there's no way of wiggling out of it.
Obviously, we will get it wrong. I think the question is not so much that we get it wrong, but how disastrously badly we get it wrong. And if I just get it moderately wrong, then I should be claiming victory.
So we will get onto that. Before we do, though, there were two things I wanted to touch on quickly. One was the conviction of Donald Trump in the case that was in New York. And one is on a story that was in the Sunday Times about the joy that is our deportation system, Michael. And I suppose it's less about that than a point I want to make about the nature of the system.
Yeah.
But we'll open with the point on Donald Trump. For those who have somehow missed it, Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. He has been convicted before a New York court of 34 charges of falsifying business records. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's going around about this, false claims on both the left and the right. So there are a couple of things I just wanted to touch upon before we talk about the actual politics of this. Basically, what happened was Donald Trump was convicted in a very peculiar way involving legal theories that would be fairly described as untested, Michael. Might be the best way to say that.
Well, it was certain innovative ways of approaching the construction of moving for example, I think the core thing was moving the charge so that they weren't simply misdemeanors to the level of felony, and the big thing was that they had to be a felony charge.
Yeah, so what Donald Trump had initially done, this relates to the payment to the porn star Stormy Daniels to stop her from making public statements about a relationship that they apparently had. And that would have been a misdemeanor with a statute of limitations of 2 years. However, they were able to basically extend that and turn them into felony charges by tying them to another crime, that being to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means. Now, I've seen some false claims here that Trump and his people were not aware of exactly what they were facing, Michael. And that refers to a particular set of jury instructions that were given out where the jury was told that they needed to find that Donald Trump had falsified business documents in order to conceal the nature of his payments to Cohen, who had made the payment to Stormy Daniels, in order to promote or prevent the election, or basically to impact upon his own election.
Mm-hmm.
But the judge said they didn't need to agree on how it had done so, and gave them 3 different options that basically they could pick from. And the argument was, if you think he's done any of these, then you can vote to convict him on this. And that's led to people saying that, that was a last minute addition. Donald Trump wasn't sure what the underlying crimes were actually going to be, and so couldn't defend against it. That's not true. Donald Trump was told, these are the 3 ways that basically this is going to be looked at. But that's one of the points that people have made. It may fall on that ground. There's some arguments that 2 of the 3 don't really stand up, and that on that basis Trump will appeal and win because they won't be able to stand over a conviction where they're not sure which underlying crime was basically deemed to be effective. There was also the fact that the statute of limitation, I don't know if you heard this argument, Michael.
Yeah.
The statute of limitations on a misdemeanor is 2 years.
Yeah.
For the felony, it's 5 years. So, New York law says that statute of limitation stops if you're outside the state, basically. And basically what they claimed was that the years that Trump spent in the White House basically stopped the statute of limitation.
Yeah.
Now,
That's right.
That's really weird. And basically, there's an argument there that, the felony is an enhancement of the misdemeanor charge. So if the time ran out on the misdemeanor, that basically you couldn't bring the felony because it couldn't stand on its own because it's an enhancement. And then they also point out that the judge has made donations to a pro-Biden, anti-Trump political operation in apparent violation of a rule barring New York judges from contributing to political campaigns. That does appear to be true. It's very strange, though. The amounts I've seen are, $15, $20, which you might think, okay, well, what's the issue then? The issue then is it appears to be correct that judges are barred from giving money in that direction. So why would you breach that requirement in order to donate such small amounts? Doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. It's frankly like a stupid thing to do. So it looks like there are significant legal issues with this case. Not really the issues that have been identified on the popular right in America. They have been kind of off the mark on that, but it does look like there's significant issues here that could be brought up by a competent legal team, and you would expect on that basis that Trump would be found not guilty upon appeal. That's I kind of think, just to give some background on this. The really interesting thing about this, Michael, is there seems to be a feeling amongst the Democratic Party that having Trump be a convicted felon will hurt his chances in the election. I'm not sure that's the case. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it makes him more popular.
I saw a tweet, I think from one of George Soros's sons, I think it was, talking about tactically, strategically, we have to keep referring to Trump as convicted felon, on the basis that this was just going to explode him as a candidate. Now, okay, I'm sure they understand that what you could call the Trumpian wing of the party, they are for Donald and for what, but I think they are imagining that middle America, the swing voter, the independent, the undecided, the rhinos will look and think, oh, this is terrible. There's nothing in the polling of the same groups that tells us that is actually likely to happen. One of the problems with this prosecution is that, say, for example, we don't want to get into technical things because neither of us are lawyers, let alone American lawyers, but I have been talking to a friend of ours who is our kind of pet American lawyer about this, who is in fact a rhino and a never Trumper, who said that the logic behind the moving of it from a misdemeanor to a felony was absolutely torturous. He said there were at least 2 or 3 elements of the construction of the prosecution which had construed aspects of the law in a way which had literally never ever been done in the history of those laws. It had never been understood like that, and had never been used like that. Everything about the case, he said, gave the impression that the law was being construed in order to prosecute one person. And there were all sorts of technical defects with the thing that he found. Just bizarre. But the point about that is so much that for him, he saw this ultimately as a political prosecution. Now, that's a very bad thing. For America, it's a very bad thing for the American legal system if you have large numbers of people believing that this was, in fact, a political prosecution. Now, and therefore, the effect that it's going to have on the Democrat. Now, the other thing is, it doesn't solve the Democrats' problem that when Donald Trump runs, he'll be running against Joe Biden.
I think the perception of this to your standard American is going to be important. And on that basis, it was probably a bad idea to have a prosecutor who would run particularly on the basis of prosecuting Trump before a judge who donated to Democratic charges using legal theories which had never been used before, and where legal scholars seem to have serious concerns about the actual validity of it. That has a kind of, should we say, Michael, not great look to it.
It doesn't, and what our friend went on to point out, he said it was rather more serious and more stupid. He said that there are other charges in other jurisdictions that Donald has yet to face, which are actually far more serious. He said, at the end of the day, this boils down to whether or not Donald gave $170,000 to a porn star so she wouldn't tell the world that he was having sex with her whilst his wife was pregnant. Or I think even possibly, depending on the timing of the thing and some of the tabloids or something were saying possibly even in labour. Ultimately, I think the reaction that that's just sex and it's a weird marriage and God knows what. But the idea that people who are voting for Donald Trump were going to be disappointed because they've discovered he's not a moral avatar was nonsense. My friend's point was that this has now established the sense in a lot of people's minds that the Democrats are involved in lawfare against Trump. And the notion of lawfare has been kind of popular for a while in the States. And this is an example, I think, that yet another example of lawfare against Trump. And he said it's going to inevitably diminish the capacity of the later and more serious cases to actually impact on Trump. What you've established the narrative for a lot of people now. This is just so when you go on to the second case, maybe in Georgia or wherever, nobody's going to listen. Or those people, the people you want to listen, are going to be far more skeptical about it. So he said that not just legally, but also politically. Now, maybe it was just the nature of things. You can't organize that the prosecutions are prosecuted in correct consecutive fashion according to your political needs. But whatever about that, this has established a narrative which is going to mean that whatever hope they had of the later and more serious charges of impacting on them have been massively diminished. That's his opinion anyway.
I don't know if you saw Biden's response. He was asked about this at a press conference. Donald Trump has taken a very Donald Trump approach to this.
Yeah.
Where on one hand, he's saying, this was rigged. I'll be a political prisoner. This is Joe Biden's fault. But on the other, he was also asked in an interview, was he going to beg for leniency in order to avoid a jail sentence? And he has this very calm sort of beg. No, you just take it as a lays. If I end up in prison, I end up in prison. And he actually comes across quite well.
Yeah.
In a sort of, it is what it is. I'm not going to beg. So if you want to put me in prison, then put me in prison. But Biden was asked, as he left a press conference, what he thought about this and that Donald Trump was blaming him. And he turns back towards the camera and he smiles. And then he seems to kind of forget where he is. And just slowly kind of turns back and kind of jerkily moves away. Does not look like he's all there. I think this case may have actually given the Republicans a fantastic slogan to run their election under.
Which is?
This election, vote for the man found mentally competent to stand trial.
That would actually, yeah, because of course, famously, that was the result, wasn't it, of the Justice report, that there was no point in pursuing it because they didn't feel that Biden would be considered to be competent to stand trial because he wouldn't his memory.
I remember in 2016 looking at the Republican debates, and they had some ridiculous amount of people there.
Yes, yeah.
10 or 12. And the amount of those people who could have been good presidents, or at least had a chance of being a good president. And then you come forward 8 years, and we've got a convicted felon against a man who appears to legitimately be going senile, and not at a slow pace. I mean, it's never a good sign, Michael, when you start reading the punctuation on your teleprompter.
That was actually kind of upsetting. That was the moment where you started to think to yourself, as a human being, looking at another human being, is it not time for somebody to come in and, intervene here? That was not nice. And the thing is, this is going back to my earlier point, Gary. Okay, you can put Donald in prison. Now, I think that would be a really bad idea. But we've now reached the stage. We're into June. So we've June, July, August, September, October. So there are 5 months left to the election. I don't know. We're very close to the point at which I don't know if it's even theoretically possible for the Democrats to put somebody else instead. It's a year out, well, even less than a year out. I thought, well, there's always the chance that maybe the conversation will be had, somebody will come in, and somebody else will be dropped. Not the vice president. It will not be, because you know what? That's the thing. You can't just have Biden resign and the VP move up, because I think the VP running would produce much the same result as a Biden run. The space available to make a change is, I think, if it hasn't run out, it's running out. And Biden looks increasingly unelectable. Also, by the way, for those for the maybe if there's a nerd listening, there's I can't remember the precise title. It's thing called the the Chicago Index, and when it goes below a certain number, it has historically always predicted with 100% accuracy recession. That has happened. So even though the economy has been very strong and Biden has been apparently getting no benefit from that, the horizon is not so nice. Now, whether or not that transpires sufficiently uh, before November to even further impact on Biden's popularity, we don't know. But the economic clouds are gathering. So it's going to be a tough election anyway. If they really wanted this stuff to work, they needed to have an alternative, and they don't have an alternative.
Well, it looked like Gavin Newsom could be the alternative. I think Newsom looked at, because Newsom is many things, but unambitious and not one of them.
Yeah,
Looked at it and went, there's a bit too much risk this cycle. I'll go again.
that's always it is an absolute dogma of mine that is the wrong thought. Gary, the number of people in politics who have looked at a moment and said, you know what, this is the wrong election for me to run. I could get the nomination, I could get the seat, but I'm not going to because it's the wrong. I'll wait for the next one. And the next one comes around and it's all gone. In 1992, there were plenty of Democrats going, I'm not really going to run this time because George Bush is nailed on. You've had Reagan, two Reagans. First, George Bush, you'd had the Gulf War. The Gulf War, that was a war the Americans actually won. And what was the point? So this guy from Hicksville down in Arkansas, former governor of Arkansas, Gary, decided to make a run for it. I mean, who the hell? Turns out Bill Clinton, not a bad politician. Turns out George Bush, not undefeatable. It's a very bad idea. Yeah, sorry, on the Newsom thing. Have you seen the latest figures on the cost of the high-speed train?
No, I have not.
We have our children's hospital, and we are very proud of our children's hospital, and we should be. I mean, we're now up, I think, at 3 times the projected cost for a hospital, which would have been perfect and fantastic and state of the art when it started, will not be when it's finished, and there will be also, and that's part of the rolling on costs because, as we talked about years ago, part of the thing about building a hospital is if you run out over time, you end up having to start all over again because the tech has moved on and you have to redesign the thing, etc. Anybody out there should have a look for a project which has not yet been built. I mean, just nothing basically exists. Billions. It's just fantastical. The amounts of money that are being spent on something which will never be built, Gary. I mean, also like California, which I think is something like the 7th biggest economy in the world, if you took it out, something like that, has gone from being in the budget surplus, to being over 30 billion in deficit. I mean, you've got all these liberals fleeing to Texas and desperately trying to change Texas when they get there. But maybe, I mean, Newsom's he's a good speaker. He's an engager, but I don't know if he's a man that I would like to run on his record, as it were, as an executive. I don't know if California's the record in the last few years would really be a great one. But Gavin, I'm sure, felt and feels otherwise. But yes, it looks like Gavin has looked and said, not this time. I think that's foolish. But anyway.
So the Democrats, the problem that they have is that there's no replacement for Biden. Even if they wanted to, they've no one they can give it to. No one who wants it. And Trump has become more popular than Biden. The polling puts him very slightly above Biden. But the problem they have is that a lot of the other people that you might think, as an emergency they might try and switch to, are polling worse against Trump.
Well, you say slightly above Biden. It depending on the polling, I suppose, but he's a little bit more than slightly. And, excuse me, I think one of the most important thing is that in the last 2 or 3 large-scale reputable polls, he has been above Biden in every one of the swing states in two of the polls, and in the third poll, he was ahead of Biden in all of the swing states, bar one. And in several of them, he was ahead by 5 and 6 points. Um, in one of the last polls, he was tying Biden with 18 to 29-year-olds, which is a problem for Biden, and a big problem for Biden. He was tying him with Hispanics. Now, one of the other things is he's tying with Hispanics, which is a big problem for the Democrats, but also the support for Trump amongst particularly the African American community is, again, stronger than anything we've seen from anybody for quite a while. And that is, in a sense, the golden ticket. This is what the Republicans have been looking for. And a lot of Republicans won't like the fact that it's Trump, but as Thomas Sowell a long time pointed out, if the Republicans could get African American support of Democrats under 80%, the Democrats would effectively never elect a president again. Now, of course, that wouldn't happen because things would rearrange themselves. But there you go. It would be an absolute body blow if they were to lose Hispanics and to reduce the absolute kind of monopoly dominance of the Democrats amongst African Americans. The Democrats would be in serious stump.
Maybe this politically hurts him. I suspect, if anything, it'll politically help him.
I think you can make an argument it could hurt him, and that it could help him, and that it will make not a lot of difference.
But anyway, on to the second story, Michael. This was in the Times, I believe, yesterday. And the story is this: rapists dodge deportation by applying for asylum in prison. A Sunday Times investigation has found 2 cases of criminals using the loophole to remain in Ireland, and this is just as an adder, but quite important, Michael, and that migrants do not have convictions checked on arrival, which is something Gript have been saying for a long time, and our ministers have not been, I wouldn't say lying about, Michael, but every time they're asked about it, they talk about checks in a very general sense.
Yeah.
And every time we look into the checks they're talking about, it becomes clear that those don't involve convictions at all, but they never say, we're just not checking convictions.
Didn't Gript ask one of the organisations responsible for this kind of collating and sharing of information how many times the Irish authorities, the Irish police, had contacted them regarding...
Yes. So there's I believe it was the Eurodac database,
yeah,
which has... It has biometric information stored, and it can basically, its primary use is to see if anyone has applied for asylum in another European country. But police can also check it against serious criminal matters. And it was being brought up by the ministers. So I went to them and said, how many times have the Irish used this system for, it's a particular type, I can't remember, I think it's like a category 3 check or something like that. I said, how many times have we put through a category 3 check? And they came back and it's like, never. So it's like, technically, again, ministers weren't lying, Michael. You can use the system to check that, which is what they were bringing up. We just weren't. But we could have.
We could have, if we'd wanted to. And that's the important.
But, I mean, it doesn't really inspire trust in the government, though. We can do this. And then you have to go around and go, how many times have they done it? And they go, never. And you go back to them and they just go, well, we could have.
And that's the important
thing. Is that not what you wanted to know? What we could have done?
You wanted to know if we had done.
What we're doing. Oh.
You see, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Anyway, okay, so we have 2 cases of people who are being held in prison awaiting trial, or what? What's the story?
So basically, they had already been imprisoned, and normally in that case is, you're a convicted rapist, you're going to be deported. Well, theoretically you're going to be deported. Whether or not you'd actually be deported or asked to deport, I'm not entirely sure. Well, but anyway, they didn't want that to happen.
Sorry, Gary, it's fairly hard to self-deport if you're in prison. I understand they're fairly sort of down on this idea of people knocking on the door and saying, listen, I need to self-deport, could you let me out? Well,
what I mean is when they get released, technically you're going to be deported.
Okay.
but are you actually put on a plane or are you asked to self-deport? Now, you might think, Michael, why would, we not forcibly remove convicted rapists at the end of their sentence? But, on the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't. And instead we tell them, you've got to leave now, please leave, and by the way, there are no checks on this.
Yeah, but if the rapist promised that he would leave, and he said, I really will, absolutely, fingers crossed, cross my hope to die, I will leave. Well, I think it would be churlish of us to insist on putting him on a bus and bringing him along, because it would imply a lack of trust, which you don't want to be that guy. Anyway, so they're replying. So these are convicted rapists, and they're replying.
Yeah.
Now, just this general question: you couldn't be deported. They could only be deported back to safe countries anyway. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So now they're applying for asylum on so they can't be deported. So they must be it's not going to be that because they're sex offenders, they wouldn't be safe in their own country, is it?
That would be a very funny thing to happen. And that has happened.
That has happened.
That has happened.
There was a guy, the Afghani guy who said, you can't send me back because I'm a sex offender, and they would kill me.
Well, this is kind of gets the point of this, Michael. When cases like this happens, you hear a lot from people about international obligations and that we are required under various conventions to deal with things in a certain matter. And this is always put forward as in, and this is the end of the conversation because of the UN Convention on Refugees or something like that.
Like that, yeah.
I'm going to make a point here, Michael. International law isn't real, at all. And eventually, if cases keep happening where people feel the law is inadequately dealing with it, let's say by forcing the state to keep a rapist in the country, people will start to ignore the law. Either on a national level, certain countries will just go, well, we don't care anymore because this is ridiculous, or people within the country will make their displeasure known in other ways. And that's the thing people forget about a lot of the law. The purpose of a lot of the law is to stop people responding directly themselves in perhaps a unpleasant manner, Michael.
Yeah, it's to professionalize and centralize the application of justice rather than to leave it in the hands of the amateurs. First of all, we've had this discussion before. I fundamentally disagree with you. The idea that international law doesn't exist, my response to that is either yes, it does, or well, yes, it doesn't exist, but no law exists. There isn't a place where we can go and see law. What I think you can say is that international law only exists because there is a tacit agreement amongst a bunch of countries to behave in a certain way, and that there will be certain consequences if you don't. Now, maybe you could say that international law, it's unclear, unlike in civil or criminal law, what the consequences are, because there is no central enforcing authority. But I don't think that central enforcing authority is a central characteristic of a legal system, because, say, for example, in Brehon law, you didn't have a central enforcing authority. Now, on the other hand, I do agree with you that regarding, it's not a finished thing, because yes, if you can say, number one, we can change the law. They say, well, this is the law. Well, then let's change the law. If you're a party to a treaty or a convention, you can resile yourself from that treaty or convention and say, we're not going to take part in that anymore. Sorry, lads, we're going. Or you can, as a group, rather than individually, say, we're going to stay in, but we're all going to ignore this law. And because practice is, with law, like with language, a determining factor, when the practice fundamentally changes, then the law will change. But I also think, frankly, theoretical discussions about the nature of international jurisprudence don't really get us very far. But except, yes, I take if you're saying the fact that, okay, international law says this is regarded by some people as a finish to a conversation is just silly. You can either ignore it, you can change it, or you can just turn your back and walk out and get out of it. There are other options. And last point, I promise, is this may also point to the fact that a lot of these conventions were done in the shadow of the Second World War and in a particular context and a particular understanding. It may be that today, in fact, I don't think it's not maybe, I think it's obviously true that today, the way those laws and conventions are written and framed is not adequate or appropriate to the conditions in which we live today. And if we want to continue to operate within a legal system, rather than have it simply break down because nobody's consistently obeying it, or people are just ignoring it, or people are leaving it, then we have to rewrite it and decide on the next level, the next evolution, because they're not working anymore. And if they continue not to work, what will happen is simply what you say. People will just ignore it. Just say, no, we're not doing that anymore.
One could also make the point, Michael, that any system which forces a state to retain a serious criminal, such as a rapist who could present a danger to the public on the basis that that individual might be hurt were they sent somewhere else, is morally perverse on the face of it. And that there should be an acknowledgement that, yeah, that's even if that was entirely possible, they brought that on themselves through their behaviour.
Yeah, well, I think you could say, with reason, that the first duty of any state is the protection and defence of its citizens from threats both internal and external. And its primary concern has to be the protection of those citizens, not other people and other people's citizens. So if this person is regarded as a threat, they have the right to say, well, we can't send our own citizens into exile because we don't do that anymore. We can't send you to Devil's Island. However, we can send you back home where they can mind you, and we don't have the responsibility to you. And if you didn't want us to do that, you shouldn't have done this terrible crime.
I mean, that seems fair.
There you go. There's a horrible black comedy to the idea that we have people who have been convicted of rape in this country and are now decide they're going to get to stay in it because it would not be safe to send them home because people might find out.
If you went to the general and public and said, well, it might not be safe if you send them home, a surprising amount of people might think that rather than that being a hindrance to sending them home, that might in fact be a good thing. But that would be bloodthirsty and vile, Michael.
It would be vile, horrible. And by the
Morally
way,
repugnant.
I think when you say a surprising number, I think you're off the mark there. I think a very unsurprising number.
Which I suppose is part of the problem that these lovers of international law and human rights have. You end up in this weird... It reminds me of the doctors who argue against private medical healthcare in Ireland.
Yeah.
On the basis that it will make the system safer. And, sorry, not safer, but more equitable. And then you realise that equitable in this sense means that more people will die. But the people who die will be more fairly distributed amongst the wealthy and the non-wealthy. And that is a better system, even if, yes, sadly, more people do have to die.
But you know my real objection to that argument, and the argument is as you frame it, is that it's not even true. You will create, more people will die, but it's not the case that rich people will die. Because rich people won't die. Rich people will just go somewhere else to get treated privately. The people who will die will be the poor, as before, and now the people who formerly could afford access to healthcare, but now can't, because while they could pay for it within a private system here, they don't have the resources to go to America or to fly to Switzerland or wherever. So they're now left with the Now, I think it may well be that you'd see a decline in life expectancy. I don't know, but what we know for certainty is suffering would increase.
Suffering would increase. I think death would as well, on the basis that early diagnosis of many things is quite beneficial. And while the Irish health system is actually decent in parts with acute conditions and things that arise suddenly and seriously, it's not very good at anything that requires diagnosis.
Well, early diagnosis, yeah, that's a problem within the increase within the ration system, within the private system. You're more likely to get early diagnosis. But I think suffering, like if you're talking about, say, people who need, hips replaced or joints replaced, that kind of thing, or scoliosis, Gary, for example, or that kind of intervention with children. I think you'll find it if you were in a private system and you could privately afford that, and you certainly can't. That will lead to an increase in suffering, undoubtedly. But now we're slightly wandering off the point. I suppose we should try and address the shame and embarrassment of how far we're going to get this wrong. Since you and this, by the way, I want to make it clear to the dear listener. This is Gary who wanted to do this. I did not, and therefore I think I should be heckled less for getting it wrong.
Yeah, I should also, just in the interest of fairness, point out that after the Irish Times poll came out, and I said I don't think that's right, I did have several private pieces of polling commissioned, which I'm going to use to base my answers on, but not give to Michael.
You know that word that I don't use, but you know what the word is and the listener knows what the word is? I would like the listener to imagine me saying, Gary, you are a total. One of those words that I don't use.
I think, Michael, this is the fairest system.
Because you're all about fairness, aren't you, Gary? You're all about fairness.
I, as the senior partner of this podcast, have greater expectations upon me, and therefore I need to advantage myself.
There are a number of things in that statement which I might take issue with, but I'm not going to, because I feel like I'm being trolled. In fact, I'm fairly sure I'm being trolled. And I am going to not rise to the bait.
So, we have the poll in the Sunday Times.
We do.
The private polling I've seen, the polling I've commissioned. By the way, commissioning your own polling is actually relatively inexpensive. I recommend more people try it.
Yeah, if you're both, God almighty. Yeah, that's what you want to do with, you have a few £1,000 in the bank. Oh, what we do? You know what we'll do, look? We'll do some polling on what people think of corporal punishment or the legalization of marijuana. See what the people think.
Now you've ruined the surprise when that poll comes out. I did, for those who are wondering, actually get some polling done, or I haven't got it back yet, on whether or not people would support replacing low and moderate level prison sentence with public caning, as they do in Singapore. And now the surprise is gone, Michael.
The surprise has not. Well, I think if the surprise has gone, Gary, it's because you have dissipated it yourself there. Okay, come on, let's get on to this shambolic nonsense.
The Irish Times have come out with their seat projections based on their Ipsos poll. They differ from pretty much everyone else that I've seen, so they're either seeing something that no one else is, or their polling is bollocksed in some way. I suspect the latter, based on, I think we went into this in the last episode, so I won't reiterate it here, but basically I don't think the Ipsos polling is worth the money charged. I think it heavily oversampled Fine Gael before, totally missed the Soc Dems and the victory of Ivana Bacek in the by-election. And I think, given that immigration is such a driver in this election, or appears to be, a method of polling which is shown to maximise the likelihood of a shy Tory incident may be causing problems for them. Or there just may be issues with the actual weighting of the sample. The polling that we've got and that I've seen aligns broadly with what Ireland thinks have come out with in the Sunday Independent. I think they are broadly accurate. The difficulty here is the trend we're seeing. We're seeing Sinn Féin weaken, we're seeing the independents go up, but we're also seeing Fine Gael go up. And it's a question of, in the last week, do Sinn Féin stabilise, do the independents fall, and do Fine Gael continue to grow? Because that could throw all of this off. Sinn Féin have fallen, I think, 7% in this poll. I think they fell 5% in the poll before. A catastrophic failure. Sinn Féin have gone from a position where it looked like they could take, they were, I'd say, Michael, a real runner for 6 seats. I think they'll probably take 2.
6 months ago, I wouldn't say, oh, massively confident. I talked to Sinn Féiners who were confident that they would be in with a run for 6 seats and thought they would take five. And I would even go
Mm-hmm.
on to say that they thought that two in Dublin was nailed on.
That does not appear to be the case now. So I suppose I'll just go through this as to my predictions, Michael. In Dublin, I think what we'll see is this: Barry Andrews, Regina Doherty, Lynn Boylan for Sinn Féin, and Niall Boylan for Independent Ireland. So that's one Fine Gael, one Fianna Fáil, Independent Ireland, and one Sinn Féin. In Midlands Northwest, I think what you'll see, and this is an interesting one because the movements in Fine Gael have thrown this up a bit. Initially, I thought it would be Carberry for Fine Gael, then Walsh, then Flanagan, then Cowan, and then I wasn't sure what way it would go for the last seat. I could see it being Sinn Féin. I could also see it being Peadar Tóibín. And then you also have Ciarán Malooly of Independent Ireland at 6%. So for the case of just giving names, I'll go Carberry, Walsh, Flanagan, Cowan, and Peadar Tóibín. But that last seat, I think, is still fairly in play. And in the South constituency, I think you'll get Sean Kelly for Fine Gael. I think you'll get Billy Kelleher for Fianna Fáil, Kathleen Function for Sinn Féin, Michael McNamara as an independent. And then the last seat, again, I think is quite messy, but I wouldn't be surprised if Grace O'Sullivan for the Green Party gets it. That would be all of the seats, I think, in this. What I will say here is that the polling we're seeing indicates that I wouldn't be surprised if no one on first preferences hits a quota, and no one in the country. And on that basis, some of these counts are going to be extremely long, with somewhere between 25 and 27 candidates, depending on the constituency. You're looking at transfer patterns that are very difficult to detect. I think a couple of the last seats could depend on that. Niall Boylan, for instance, in Dublin, I think will take the last seat. However, you also have beneath him, you have Kieran Cuff and you have Aidan O'Riordan. Now, Claire Daly in the Irish Independent poll looks like she's in play. The polling I've seen suggests she's not really, but maybe she is. But at least you'll have Cuff and O'Riordan. They go out in the wrong way, or they transfer the right way, or transfers don't go to Boylan from the 8 or 9% of, shall we say, Michael, the anti-establishment vote. If that doesn't go to him, I can see him missing out on the last seat. On the other hand, if Sinn Féin continue to fall, Lynn Boylan might miss out on a seat. I mean, it's unlikely, but it's possible, and it wouldn't be the first time she's missed out on a seat in Dublin. But no, that is what I think it will be. Michael, what do you think?
Okay, well, start Dublin. No, I I want to first of all reiterate something that Gary said, and I think that's when at the end of the day, it's guesswork and numbers from polling, because we have no clue which way really, because the polls are kind of different. I mean, we're not getting real hard matching polls, bang, bang, bang. And you might say, well, that's always the same. But as you have said before, Gary, because you have such clumping in these numbers, if you get a couple of points up this way and a couple of points down that way, it changes everything. And
Mm-hmm.
if Sinn Féin are trending down in the last week, even by a couple of points, and the independents trend up even by a couple of points in the last week, that will make all of the difference in the world. So I think this is still a very unstable situation. Looking at Dublin, I think you'd say, okay, Doherty and Andrews, certainly. Um, After that, okay, since we have to do this, we'll do it. I'm going to say Lynn Boylan and Niall Boylan as well. But if Sinn Féin are on the swing down, that Lynn Boylan is not going to look anything like as safe as it should do. Dahi Doolan is only on 3.5%. She's on 11.2. Now, Niall Boylan is a little bit lower than a lot. Some people had him on 9.2. Now, what's the margin of error, by the way, on this one, Gary?
It's 4%,
Like,
4.4, I think.
I think it's four. It's like 4.4%. That's a big margin of error.
I think it's worth pointing out that Regina Doherty is generally considered safe. But from what I was hearing on the ground, there was an amount of panic as to how her campaign was going.
Yes,
So I wonder, is there a suspicion that she might underperform on the day? And is there now a hope that the general upsurge in Fine Gael is basically going to cancel that out and she's still going to kind of come in nicely? But one to watch on the day, I think.
yes, I think that'll be interesting. On the Niall Boylan thing, I'd say one of the things, Gary, maybe we'll do this, save this for then, but just observing, when you look at the national polling saying independents in around 25%,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and then if you transfer that onto there doesn't seem to be a straight transfer onto that, onto the named candidate polling. But I observe in Dublin, if you total the, shall we say, the right leaning alternative independent whatever voices,
Mm-hmm.
immigration skeptical, blah blah blah, that are underneath there, there's over 10% on the polling. So it's not that there are no transfers. There are transfers available, and I think that Boylan should probably be fairly transfer friendly. But you'd have to say you have Claire Daly, Breach Smith, Aidan O'Riordan, and Kieran Cuff there. Now,
Mm-hmm.
on the basis of a Gary, you'd have to say there's a seat there. 7 and 7, 14. 14 and 5 is 19. There's a easily, amongst those four, all left wing, all pro board. So,
The thing I would be interested to see there is the Claire Daly and Brid Smith transfer patterns.
yeah.
Because I don't think you're going to see a clean transfer pattern to Labour, and I wouldn't be surprised if Niall Boylan actually picks up a surprising amount of that. On the independent thing, the desync between the national polls
Yeah.
and the European polls, I think you're absolutely right on. I get the sense from talking to people on the ground that because of the nature of this election campaign and that it's been fought exceptionally quietly, a lot of people don't know who these people are. So I think there's a desire to vote independent, but perhaps not an idea of who that actually translates to as a name. And if I'm right, we may see the polls actually causing an impact because they're positioning Niall Boylan in Dublin as the predominant independent candidate.
And as people be, yeah, exactly. It may be that in the last week, people who want to vote independent will go looking for who is the independent to vote for, and you get a substantial break towards them. But also, by the way, I didn't include Sinead Gibney in that. Now, if you include Sinead, that's 9, 7, 15, that's 24. There's a hell of a lot of votes between Claire Daly, Kieran Cuff, Aidan Reid, Breach Smith, and Sinead Gibney.
Mm-hmm.
There's not just one seat. There's two seats there. I mean, in votes, and there will be a lot of leakage. So if you want, no, actually, just so I don't have the same prediction as you, I go Regina Doherty, Barry Andrews, Niall Boylan, and Kieran Cuff.
I think you're right. I think if the transfers break down a particular way and Sinn Féin's fall continues, Daithí Doolan doesn't appear to be doing much for Lynn Boylan. So you may actually see, Boylan, Sinn Féin totally out of the race, and either Cuff or Reardon come in. No, I can absolutely see it.
And I'm going for Cuff because I think that the Greens will be more transfer friendly amongst that demographic than O'Riordan.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think that friends of ours do not understand or don't want to, that there is still a hardcore convinced Green vote, especially in Dublin, in urban and suburban Dublin, that is not going away. Okay, let's look at next one up is the Northwest, Midlands Northwest. Now, the first, just wanted to observe on passing. Just note, I think something we should look at when the results come out, and just as we're here, look at the polling for the Labour Party in these three constituencies. I think that is really, it's bizarre. You're looking at a Labour candidate in this constituency polling. Now, not an area that Labour ever historically were strong in, I will admit, but 0.8% Fergal Landy. Has anybody heard of Fergal Landy? Okay, anyway, that said, okay, we'll call Luke Ming Flanagan. That's the one I'm putting in as a certainty. At this stage, Carberry has fallen back. I don't
Mm.
know precise if that is as the result. We know that Fine Gael love doing polling. And one of the things they do, particularly Europeans, they do lots of polling, and they use that polling to move around boundaries and to take posters up and put posters down and try and manage their vote. Uh, so Nina has fallen back. So I'm going to go Maria Walsh, Luke Ming Flanagan, Barry Cowan. After that, I'm in trouble, Gary. I really am. Um, where the hell do you go?
I
Um,
think you've got the two Shinners. Both are performing respectively, but just not enough to get them up there to Flanagan or Welch's level. I'm not so sure about Flanagan. I think Flanagan's transfer, like he'll come in probably first or second in the first preferences. But it'll be interesting then to see how many transfers he actually brings in.
I don't know historically, but I think that independent, and he is an independent after all. If not new, I think he'll be fairly transfer friendly. I think he'll do okay. I think whatever happens, I think on that number he has enough to do it. The Sinn Féin vote combined is still only around 12%, and
Mm.
that's assuming which you absolutely cannot 100% transfer levels.
Well, I
And
suppose it's worth pointing out that when you look at transfers between people of the same party, if you can get 40 or 50% of their total votes transferred, like that's a good inter-party transfer. So that let's say McManus goes out first and Gildernew is still there. That's still only 9% for Gildernew.
I mean, once upon a time, a 50% transfer, if you had between 50% between, say, a Fianna Fáil and the other Fianna Fáil candidates, that would have been regarded as dreadful. Times are very different now. People don't transfer in the same kind of way at all. So, and okay, we have to say someone. So we say Walsh, we say Flanagan. This is a five-seater. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, Maluli is on 6.4 here. We have seen him higher. I've seen two. I've seen a proposed, not done by us, but shall we say, given to us by friends of ours, that had Maluli being elected second. I mean, on this basis, he's not. So I'm going to give Maluli being is going to go out and he will elect Padder. So Walsh, Flanagan, Tobin. God, it's so crowded, isn't it? So yeah,
And
it
they're all within a couple of percent of each other.
this is going to go on forever. I mean, okay, it's I'm gonna okay again just to be different, I'm gonna go Walsh, Flanagan, Cowan, Tobin, Maluli. I'm gonna go on this. I'm gonna go on the same basis that I was in the first one, which is that the Sinn Féin vote is going to keep falling, and the independent vote is trending up, and that the independents are going to be transfer friendly. I don't know if I even believe that. My suspicion is that the Sinn Féin vote actually will stabilise, but I could very. Everybody tells me I'm wrong about that, and they're probably right. But I'm looking at this, Gary, and I don't know how you could call it. I really don't. Carberry to take Fine Gael to take two seats on 19% of the first preferences.
I think what will happen there is some of the initial polling I had seen had Carberry above Welch. Now
Yes, I saw that.
that's changed, and now Welch is above. I think Carberry is going to do very well on transfers because Carberry comes from a very well liked family, a very solid family, connected to racing, obviously. And then she has that on two sides as well. So I think there's a lot of people, particularly in her region, who have sort of a general positivity towards her. I think she'll pick up quite heavily on transfers, and I think that'll go very nicely for her. The problem I think Maluli has is we were saying that in Dublin, Niall Boylan is becoming, or by polling appears to be the primary independent candidate if you want an independent elected. Mullooly has the problem that Flanagan is in his constituency. And Flanagan can rightfully say that he has been an independent MEP. He knows how it works. He's known as being an independent. And I think, therefore, you don't get that kind of drive towards him that Boylan will probably benefit from. And so I think that keeps Mullooly out.
Actually, I'm going to change my mind, and this is why. I'm just looking at the numbers here. If the national polling is anywhere right, Fine Gael are going to do better than that. If the national polling is right, Fine Gael are going to do better, and they're going to do better, I think, in here. This is a place where they have to. So I'm going to give Fine Gael 2 here, which does not fill me with joy. Walsh Carberry, Flanagan Cowan, and Tobin. And I'm going to stick with Sinn Féin not to take a seat there. Because that's what I thought. I thought that this is the weakest, which is weird. I don't understand why. You can speculate, but I think that this has been the weakest constituency for Sinn Féin for the whole of the campaign. Okay, and lastly,
or Ireland South.
Ireland South. And again, I just want to bring a note here. The Labour Party is on 3.6%, right? Now, now, this is a constituency which contains Wexford, which is Carlow Kilkenny, Tipperary, Limerick, Cork, Kerry, which are all constituencies that historically returned Labour TDs. This is not like the Northwest, where you had no Labour presence. This was the area which probably had was the centre for the Labour Party in Ireland. You had the Pattersons in Kilkenny, Cornish vote in Wexford. You had TRSI in Kilkenny, the Spring over in Spring vote in Kerry. You had the Cork City vote. You had the Sherlocks. Then Limerick, etc., etc. It's I think anyway. Okay, Kelly will be elected, possibly on the basis of he's 18.5 in this. In one vote, he had 24%. We've seen a couple of 14%. Sean Kelly could come close to being elected on the first count. He may be the only person in the country.
If he overperforms the polls, I've seen he may actually get there. It depends how Fine Gael moves, but yeah, I could see it. He is, either way, he's one of the best vote getters in this election. Like, there's no doubt about
that. Billy Kelleher will take a seat. Everything seems to be pointing that way. His running mate is O'Muraku, who is, I'm looking on 4.6, which is actually up from where she was before. I think Michael McNamara takes a seat.
Mm-hmm.
He's on 10% on this. Others have seen him, and then we have fun. Another one I want to draw attention to here, which I think is an interesting one, is, and this is consistent, Gary. This is not this poll. This is consistent. Is Derek Bly is on 4.3%. He has been solidly around 4 to 5%.
Yeah, that was quite interesting, because that came up, I think, in the Ipsos poll, and everyone thought it was nonsense. And then it came up in other polls, and then we saw private polling, and he actually seems fairly nailed on at 4 or 5%.
And I think that's a really interesting one. I think somebody should go and dig into that a bit. So, Kelleher, McNamara, Kelly, fine. Mick Wallace looks very unlikely, doesn't he? I don't see, unless he comes with a big surge at the end, I don't see where the votes are going to come from underneath. This is the least clumped. You've got the top 4, and then it really narrows very quickly after that.
I've had the feeling all throughout this election that Claire Daly and Mick Wallace are not terribly interested in being re-elected.
They're not running campaigns effectively. They really aren't. So, we'll see.
Like, I saw a comment by Mick Wallace. I think it was in one of the papers, but I only glanced at it. And it was something like, we're sitting MEPs, there was a lot of pressure on us to run again. And had this kind of sound of, I mean, we're doing it, but like, we're not really bothered about it.
Yeah, we didn't really want to, but friends asked us. Ah, listen, as it goes, Kelly, Kelleher, McNamara function. And yeah, let's. If it's not Grace O'Sullivan, who else is it going to be?
Well, you have a fairly decent split. Like the populist kind of anti-establishment vote under ignoring McNamara and Blige is about 14%.
Yeah.
So, that actually goes into play. You could see Blige do very, very well. You could see McNamara do very, very well. I think Blige will again suffer from McNamara basically taking a percentage of his vote. I think you're probably right that Grace O'Sullivan, maybe that goes to Mick Wallace, pushes him ahead.
Well, Wallace has to go ahead of O'Sullivan. And I don't. Okay, if you just look, Eddie Punch is on 3%, we'll say. Aim 2 is on 2%. Irish Freedom, so 3 and 2 are 5 and 1 are 6. That's 6%. Rowerta, what's Rowerta? Is that one of those greeny ones? I should know these things. Mary Fitzgibbon is on 0.5%. Kieran O'Riordan on 0.5%. So you'd imagine that Niamh Hourigan would transfer mostly she to Grace O'Sullivan. Like Gavin, there's not enough for two Shinners. There's not enough for two Fianna Fáilers. There's only one Fine Gaeler really in the running because
No.
Mullins. Hold on. Wait, no, sorry. I was going to try and make an argument for Sean Kelly getting 20% and transferring heavily. No, that's not going to work.
No. No.
So McNamara, I don't see who else other than O'Sullivan it can be, with the proviso that there could be something odd will happen there. You never know. But Kelly, Kelleher, McNamara function, O'Sullivan, as is listed, I would say, and Kathleen Function being the Sinn Féin representative.
I should point out here that based on all of the polling we've seen, it's entirely possible that Sinn Féin doesn't take a seat anywhere.
It's possible.
Like,
Now,
I wouldn't say it's likely, but if it happened, I wouldn't be surprised.
As I've called it, we have Function being the only one being returned. I can also very easily see them taking 3 seats. And I still find it hard to believe that Lynn Boylan could fail to take a seat. If Lynn Boylan failed to take a seat, I think that you would be now in the territory where Mary Lou's leadership would be at risk. I think that would be a disaster for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there you go. We shall be voting on Friday.
Yeah, I think the problem there is if Sinn Féin continue to decline, they don't need and they underperform at all, then they go from being slightly above the mix to being in the mix.
Yeah.
And once they're in that, with the chaos that transfer patterns will be, God knows what way that can happen. It's not going to be a comfortable election for a lot of their people anyway.
No. I mean, I suppose that, as I said, that's the way I'm plumping for it. That we have to guess where the trend is. And if the trend is, even slightly, for Sinn Féin to keep going down for the last week, lose a couple of points. And if the trend for the independents is still strong, up a couple of points. And Fine Gael up a couple. That will, in this election, will make all the difference. It will swing seats. And the transfers are going to be. The other thing is, we talk about transfers and we're quite right to, but actually, weirdly, because transfers are so important, first preferences are going to be hugely important. Because it may simply be whoever comes out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the first count will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the last count. Because with transfers being so dispersed and so undisciplined, that getting ahead of the guy or the gal in front of you may be very tricky.
Yeah, I think also what we could see, mostly dealing with everyone really, because as I said, it's going to be very difficult to hit the quota, is votes, let's say, between the government parties that should help each other not doing so, or even votes that should help people within the same party, because no one is going to hit the quota. So those votes are going to go to the Fine Gael or the Fianna Fáil, and they'll basically be stagnant, because that person is in the lead anyway, doesn't matter to them, but because they won't hit the quota, there will be no redistribution.
Yeah. It's going to be very weird. There are interesting things that I'll be looking for. Obvious, other than the numbers, obviously, of who is elected. I will be looking to see what the total Labour vote is, because it feels like there hasn't really been a Labour campaign at all. The Labour have not been present in this, and I can remember, because I worked on the European campaign in 2009, and NASA Childers got elected. I'm not sure, was NASA Childers the last Labour MEP? Anyway, I think she resigned the whip after. But it's a very strange election for me to see Labour so utterly disengaged. I'll be very curious also to see how Derek Bly does. I think that's one of the curious things, and I'd like someone to explain what kind of campaign he's running, how he's making this kind of impact, because that number, 4 to 5%, has been solid, and that is a lot of votes in a European election. He's doing something down there.
So I think on Bly, I think a lot of people kind of lumped Bly in with this sort of, not even protest vote, but a sort of disreputable, unserious kind of thing. But from everything I've heard of what he's doing down there, sounds like proper campaigning, though. It sounds like he is going out, he's canvassing, he's talking to people, he's doing videos about it. There is some message discipline. And maybe that is the lesson here, that, even if you are considered absolutely disreputable to at least a lot of the media in the country, you can still get some pickup if you just present yourself in a professional fashion.
So I will hope to be at least some of the local counts on Saturday. Get the tallies in and get some commentary, and then I'll probably pop in to one of the count centres, probably Dublin, on Sunday. So we will be back. I'm not sure when we'll be recording next. We will record sometime, whether it's early or late. But whenever it is, the next time we speak, we shall know. Well, I'm saying that. We may not actually know, finally and definitively. This could go on a long time, but I don't think so. I think we will, the next time we speak, we shall know. So everybody out there, have a good week and think and contemplate. But whatever you do, vote, as long as you vote for the people that we would like you to vote for.
As they say, vote early and vote often. All the best.
Bye-bye.